Welcome to part two of our interview with Jay Feldman, Director, Beyond Pesticides, an incredible nonprofit group out of Washington, D.C. that's been fighting a long fight to protect all of us and our environment against toxic pesticides and contamination of our food that can cause disease and all kinds of other problems. We left off last time where Jay was starting to tell us about Montgomery County, Maryland, and the incredible monumental law that was passed there to not allow pesticides to be sprayed on any lawns, including businesses and residential areas. This is really huge, but as he points out in his interview, once we start down a path, we can usually figure it out and find better ways of doing things than we were doing before that are safer for our families, our pets, and our waterways and food and everything else involved. So he also talks about the integrity of the USDA certification program. Many people are not sure whether they can trust it or not. I really hope that you'll take the time to listen to Jay. He fully explains. He was part of the explains that he was part of the development process. It's set up where the people are in charge, not the government, but the government will try to take control, and they have had to go to court against the USDA, challenging them for trying to do that, and it's actually very interesting. So please stay for the whole interview, and thank you so much for tuning in to Smart Health Talk. It's a pleasure to have you as a listener, and we're here for you to educate you on how you can protect your families against these kinds of things that are going on right now that we don't have control of, but we do have control of our choices and what we buy and what we eat. So please stay tuned for our interview with Jay, and I think you'll find it very enlightening. Explain that a little bit, because I thought that was monumental.
Yes.
What you guys were able, well, a lot of people worked on the Montgomery County, Pennsylvania ordinance, which did pass and becomes effective 2017.
This is Montgomery County, Maryland.
In Maryland, excuse me.
First, the city of Tacoma Park, Maryland, a city of about 17,000, passed an ordinance that prohibited the use of toxic pesticides in turf management. And this affected both private land, your front yard, backyard, as well as public parks and playing fields.
And now why? Why are they doing this? Some people may, hey, wait a minute, I want to be able to still use that weed killer.
Right. Because like we were saying earlier, when you use a chemical on your property, it doesn't stay on your property. It moves off of the target site, your property, to a neighbor's property. It runs off into waterways.
It goes in the air.
It's like secondhand smoke.
Oh, yeah, that's a good
where
comparison.
You are essentially, unintentionally perhaps, we're not saying this is willful, but by virtue of using this product, you are causing unintended effects off of your property, onto your neighbor's property.
I get upset when I see my neighbor, next to me or across the street or where I walk my dog, spraying Roundup, which, we know, I also wanted to see if I could get you to explain, too, that, because people get confused. Like they hear the World Health Organization say, oh, this is probably cancer-causing, but then some German agency says, well, maybe not. But we have a difference in looking at just glyphosate, the active ingredient, versus the total Roundup product, including the inert ingredients. Right. And that's like a really scary thing. Are these other ingredients that are as high as 96% in a product that can be toxic by themselves, and they don't even have to tell us what the heck is in there. Right.
Well, you've raised a really critical issue.
And I know you guys have fought for this for years now. It's a big fight.
And we're fighting on this issue relative to organic, because EPA changed its inert ingredient policy, and it no longer maintains these lists that it used to have. They used to have list 1 through 4, and list 4 was a category of inerts, and these are chemicals that are biologically and chemically active. These are chemicals that are labeled inert. They can be highly toxic.
And you combine them together and they create new chemicals.
Because they're not put in the product to target the pest. So that is a term of art. It's not a scientific definition of the functionality of this product or the adverse impacts associated, health and environmental impacts. So when the organic or USDA and at the time the National Organic Board took this allowed list and just allowed it in organic, it did it as a stopgap measure to future review down the road. Now is the time for the future review, mostly because at this point EPA no longer manages the list, but also because it turns out that list 4 is divided into two lists, list 4A and 4B. EPA no longer manages the list, so it's a static list at this point. Meanwhile, new products are still coming up.
New products are being developed and added.
List 4B was determined to be not of toxicological concern because it didn't create an exposure scenario. Meanwhile, List 4B is being allowed in organic, but it could be causing harm to microbial activity in the soil. It could be causing harm to wildlife, but EPA evaluated those materials as acceptable because of no or limited human exposure through food. That's one area of review under the Organic Foods Production Act. As you know, we're looking very holistically under the Organic Foods Production Act at the impact on soil, wildlife, the environment generally.
Because they were just looking at the food and they're going, oh, this is sprayed on the plant before it even produces the food.
Right.
So we can't say that, oh, that's not good. So they're saying, oh, well, that's not in the food per se because it was sprayed before that.
It is in the food.
And it is in the
food. The reality is, I said earlier, organic is continuous improvement. We have to make sure that we do not rest on our laurels, that we stay up with the science, we maintain continuous improvement so that we ensure that when new information comes in, we utilize that information and we up the standards by which we review these materials. And so, the standard is a legal standard. The review process is constantly taking in new science, new information on whether we actually need a particular input, the necessity of that material. And, there's a program at EPA, we were just visiting with them the other day, called Design for the Environment. And they are identifying new green chemistry for detergents and for soaps and for all kinds of household products. And so the idea is we incentivize the removal from the market of these toxic ingredients, whether they're considered inert or they're considered active only by virtue of a definition that defines an active as put in that product, put in a chemical product for purposes of attacking a target pest, as opposed to inert, which is a carrier, can be the solution in which the material, the surfactant, that is the sticking agent, the liquid in which it is mixed so that it can be disseminated, the granule in which it is placed.
Well, can't we put a figure on this, a dollar figure on this? Because to me, we're investing $1, but maybe we're getting back $5 because we've prevented, destruction. We prevented contamination. We're not killing all the bees, kind of a thing. I mean, so does anyone
David Pimentel, professor emeritus at Cornell University, years ago did an analysis like this, and he looked at the externalities. He looked at the impact on pollination services, which is extremely expensive. Those almond growers,
they take them across the country even.
Blueberries, whatever is needed for pollination is now costly because you have to truck in pollinators because we've killed off natural pollinators. And this is years ago now, he calculated something in the range of $3 billion a year in costs associated with pesticide use. And that's lost work days because of, sickness and illness. And so there are real costs associated with the chemical dependency in conventional agriculture. The point here is, the bottom line is that we have made tremendous progress with organic. We have eliminated virtually all the toxic inputs, chemical inputs in terms of pesticides in conventional system. We still have some that we would consider dangerous and must be used very carefully. One example is copper, still widely used in organic, but it isn't used routinely. It is used based on conditions in the context of an organic systems plan. We used to allow, another great example of positive change, we used to allow antibiotics in apple and pear production in organic. And we took that out of the mix and prohibit that now in organic production. That's a no-brainer. People listening may say, why was that ever allowed in organic? Because organic is part of this continuous improvement that happens with public input that is critical to the process by which we get to where we need to be.
Well,
right now, we're in this battle with big food and consumers, and unless consumers step up, we will see the deterioration of this label with hydroponics, with aquaculture, with allowed materials that should not be allowed in organic production and must be removed over time. We are litigating on two key principles. We've already mentioned one. One is the allowed contamination in compost.
This is litigation that your group is involved in partnership, maybe even with some other groups.
With other.
And this is something we should all be paying attention as consumers. Okay, go ahead and tell us what you're doing.
We're working with the Center for Food Safety on this. We have legal support on our staff that is contributing to this as well. So, we're working hand in hand. Contamination in compost is a foundational principle, right? Organic is based on the soil, on compost. We cannot be allowing contamination of farm inputs in organic, and we cannot allow USDA to allow that. And the
circumvent the law.
In court, the case you're referring to earlier, USDA had the nerve to challenge our standing in court. Basically went to the court after we filed,
they were wrong,
and said these organizations do not have standing to challenge USDA, and the court disagreed with them. They basically disagreed and said, of course they have standing, and of course you guys at USDA changed the definition of allowed contamination. You changed that definition without subjecting.
Without the process that included the board and the people of this country.
Right, exactly. And again, consumer expectation, consumer involvement. This is what has driven organic to the place it is. And I don't care if you're the biggest retailer of organic in this country. I don't care if you're the biggest producer of organic products in this country. You cannot ignore organic consumers as a major leg in this three-legged stool: certification, production, and consumer expectation. Critical. That stool will fall over. We will lose this market unless we respect the consumer concern.
Keep the integrity, and continue to improve.
That's right. And, organic grew with a healthy collaboration among all these sectors. Organic grew because consumers joined with farmers, joined with processors, joined with retailers, and grew this market to where it is. That coalition, that collaboration must remain intact. It must be nurtured, and it must grow to grow the market. You can't have growth in the organic sector without collaboration among all these different parts of the community.
So what do you say to?
And let me go to the second lawsuit.
Oh yeah, the second one.
The second lawsuit, in many ways, is even more important than the first.
Okay.
Again, USDA changed the sunset process. The sunset process mentioned earlier really is the process by which the allowed practices in organic, principally the allowed materials in organic, are removed from the list every 5 years and either relisted or allowed by default to come up.
The carrageenan we talked about.
Carragene's an example, but we're talking about now over 100 different materials that are allowed in production and processing. And the law requires that there be a 2/3 majority vote to put a material on the list, on the national list, and then every 5 years, a 2/3 majority to relist that material. So if the board by 2/3 does not approve that material in the first place, it doesn't get on the list. If the board by 2/3 does not review and relist the material, it does not stay on the list. So anything less than, in this case, it's a 10-member board, you would need 10 members of that board to relist that material. That means 6 people on the board. Remember I said earlier, you've got 3 conservationists, you've got 3 environmentalists, 3 conservation environmentalists, that's one category, 3 consumers, 3 farmers. Any coalition can form 6 votes, that material does not stay on. So it preserves this concept of the 3-legged stool by virtue of saying, unless you somehow generate near consensus of what integrity means, of what the science says, you cannot allow that practice or that material in organic production. So USDA felt that that was too high a burden. It felt it created uncertainty in the market, that producers didn't know from one 5-year period to the next whether they would lose their material. That majority should rule. That's an argument they use. Why should it be that 6 people could block a material from staying on the list? Well, because the law says that it is critical to maintaining integrity to have all the sectors of the environmental community buying in and creating this definition of integrity.
Who says that they can choose otherwise?
They don't have the legal authority to do this. And so basically the judge looked at this. Again, they questioned our standing. And the judge looked at this and said, well, you can't just show me as a judge that they failed in their carrying out of the process. You have to show that there's an injury associated with that. And we felt it might have been enough just to say to the judge, look, here's a critical foundational issue in organic. The default assumption that synthetics go on the list as an exception only with a 2/3 vote, and they only stay on the list as an exception with a 2/3 vote. If USDA wants to change that, it must certainly bring that to public review, because that is an interpretation of the law that was subject to rulemaking, and therefore you must go back through rulemaking to make that determination. And the judge looked at our complaint and the brief and basically said, you didn't link the failure process with an identified harm associated with that failure. So he said, come back to me, give me an example of potential harm associated with that violation of process, and I will make a ruling on that. And so we went back and did that. At this last meeting in Vermont, we found 23 votes that would have gone the other way. Materials would have been removed that otherwise were not removed under the current sunset process. They would have been removed under the legal concept of sunset, but were not removed because of a 1-vote difference. And so that tears at the integrity of the process. These decisions are not taken lightly. It is very rare that a material has been taken off that has hurt the organic market. Over the years, we've seen the growth curve. It's a straight line.
Supply and demand. People start demanding. Someone will supply.
So this is, there's an element of greed here. I mean, let's be honest. Yeah. I mean, you can't show a higher growth curve in any sector of the food industry, and yet this isn't a high enough growth curve. And the methods that we have used to get to where we are methods that I, as an environmental public health advocate, can say to my constituency is protecting you. As we weaken those standards,
what's their excuses on how it's harming them? The only thing I can think of is financially, because they'd have to spend more money.
Yeah, well, that's not even always the case. Sometimes it's changing a cultural practice. It's creating a new material that can be used, which is happening every day for virtually all the materials. So in the case of antibiotics, it was new rootstocks, new cultural practices, planting the trees further apart, new pruning practices to get more air circulation through the orchards, and a new yeast-based product that was necessary and is necessary under weather conditions, where fire blight, which is the infection that is being controlled, needs to be controlled. So with all these different factors and inputs and practices, we get to a point where we still have an growing organic market. And the irony during this whole debate was that the EU does not accept any product grown with antibiotics. So if you have an export market in apple and pears in the U.S., you're shipping your fruit over to the EU, the European Union, then you cannot use antibiotics.
So that hurts farmers. It hurts the farmers' ability to sell. So
farmers adapted to that.
Yeah.
We had a burgeoning export market for apples and pears because it's a very lucrative market. And maybe the production per acre went down a little bit, but the value of that crop went up tremendously. Now, some people will say, well, isn't that going to make the food unaffordable? If you force these different, cultural practices that are going to reduce productivity or reduce the amount of fruit that can be grown off of that land, aren't you going to increase the price and make that food unaffordable? Not if we put more land into organic production, which is the opportunity here. As we put more land into production, we equalize the availability of that supply, and then we increase that supply accordingly. And as we increase supply, price comes down. So, this is like any other area of marketplace economics. We have to see this transition. It has to occur, and it has to occur faster than it's occurring, certainly. We have to tie this issue to global climate change because we are sequestering only a fraction of carbon, ambient carbon, that we can in our soil with conventional systems.
And agriculture is like one of the biggest avenues that we could use to reduce the carbon in our air and reduce the threat of climate change.
That's exactly right. So this is the answer. I say to my friends in the environmental community that are not working in organic, why aren't you working on organic? Why are you tinkering over at EPA with improved risk assessment that allows maybe a smaller application rate of a toxic chemical that's still destroying soil microbial activity? It ignores the beneficial fungi and beneficial bacteria in the soil. It kills the earthworms. Why are you messing around with that?
Well, I talked to one farmer and they felt like, how come my conventional orchard has no bugs, no weeds, and my organic has all these bugs and weeds, and it's a mindset that if you read the epitaph for a peach by Mr. Matsumoto, or a farmer of peaches here in California, it's a mindset because he was like ridiculed because his orchard looked messy because he had weeds growing. It wasn't all like perfectly groomed and you didn't see a weed anywhere. So, and people thinking that they have to have some perfect giant fruit or vegetable to eat, that is better somehow. What do you say to that as consumers on how we can change that mindset?
Yeah, this is part of the cultural shift that has to go on. We're really talking about a transformation. We've seen transformations at different times in the history of our society. One of the major transformations I think that we've all experienced in our lifetime is recycling. We didn't grow up with recycling, and now recycling is second nature. When it was first proposed, especially as municipalities decided that this was the thing to do, the bottle industry said this can't be done. It's too expensive. There's no way to do it. And in fact, we are finding that in fact it is the best thing to do. In terms of resource management, in terms of environmental protection and public health protection. But it was a painful transition because industry was fighting this as undoable, unworkable, not economical, increased the cost of of doing business and increase the cost of product in the marketplace.
When we
We're
use
hearing the
less
same,
energy in the process, less resources.
right.
And,
So we're seeing the same thing with organic. Same argument. It's too costly. It can't be done. It'll increase the cost of the product in the marketplace. This is more efficient. Whatever the arguments are, they replicate most arguments that are made when we're going through a cultural transformation and in the way in which we as consumers operate. We believe strongly that as we go through this transition, part of our educational program must be focused on the larger environmental impact that we as individuals have on our footprint on the planet. And so we created a website called Eating with a Conscience, and that website is really intended to show you that if you pick up an onion and you say, well, this onion, because it's got the thick skin and because I've looked at USDA data, has virtually no residues of pesticide in the onion, the edible portion of the onion, and therefore I don't need to buy that onion as an organic onion. And then you go to our Eating with a Conscience page and you look and see the 50 chemicals that are registered for use on that chemicals: groundwater contamination, contamination of farm workers, impact on pollinators, runoff into waterways, on and on and on. And then the issues we've been talking about, which is reduction in the threat to global climate change. You see that as a consumer, you're making a choice as to what impact you're having on the planet and whether you're part of the problem or the solution. And yes, it's very important to be concerned about what we feed our families and what we put in our bodies. That's a critical motivator for people. But if you get down to the store and you start thinking, well, I should buy this organic or that organic, you are, because of residues only, you're really forgetting about the bigger picture which you are a part of and the bigger solution, organic solution, which you are a part of. Now, I'm not going to say that everybody right now can afford organic food.
I'm working on something to show how you can afford organic,
right.
And going to the farmers market.
We published a piece in our newsletter. It's on our website. You can Google it, called The Affordability of Organic Food.
Oh, okay.
Of how you can eat organic food affordably. I mean, there are farmers markets, all kinds of things we throw out when we're cooking a meal. Mm-hmm. I always think that the example of the broccoli and the broccoli stalk, which we may not eat, but creates a great broth, vegetable broth.
I use my celery tops in a soup.
The
celery tops are like perfect.
So those kinds of ideas where you can extend the use of that crop,
and it ends up in my compost pile, and it makes soil that I don't have to go buy. That who knows what's in it at the home improvement store. I'm making soil in my backyard right now for free from all my clippings from my leftovers from the kitchen.
Yeah, so there is the affordability issue, and we can't deny that to be the case. Although I notice, as I walk through conventional markets, and even in a company like Safeway, the differential between organic and conventional is really not that great.
It isn't that much.
So we're seeing less and less of that. But let's say there is a differential. You're going shopping. You have a limited food budget. You can identify the foods that your family eats most and buy those products organically. So where somebody might say, there are a lot of residues on strawberries, it tends to be the example.
I say never eat a non-organic berry ever.
Right. But if you eat a lot of strawberries, buy that organically. If your kids are drinking a lot of juice, buy organic juice. So you identify what you eat most of. The other thing we really need to work on
away from juice.
is, you can stay away from these products too. But, eat in season. That's a big issue on the
I love that one.
If you eat in season, you're going to reduce the cost of food, your bill at the grocery store. But the other thing is we really have to improve the law in terms of the Women, Infants, and Children program, WIC, and what is
I work for
allowed to
WIC,
be.
okay? I trust me, I had to push that food, those coupons, and people can use their coupons at the farmers market with
Right?
the
That's
WIC
the
program.
movement.
So if we can push that more, but I had a very hard time knowing what was in the milk, in the juice,
Exactly.
to be
And
pushing
that's
those
determined
products.
often at the state level. And so some states will allow you to buy organic milk, other states will not.
Oh,
There's
I didn't
no
know
reason
that.
that WIC should ever prohibit a family of lesser means from having access to organic food. That is unconscionable in this
Well,
country.
they're usually on Medi-Cal and some other government subsidized healthcare program. So in a way that, ensuring that they get a more healthful type of product that has more
Exactly.
nutrition in it. I mean, we could actually be saving healthcare dollars. And that's what I look at from a public health standpoint when I talked earlier about the looking at the big picture and the financial cost where we may save money here, but we end up actually spending more money here. And actually, the WIC program gets funded on the whole basis that they say for every dollar spent, we save $3.14. Because if you prohibit one premature birth could cost millions of dollars,
That's
just
right.
one. And if we prevent one, we could actually, instead of having a premature birth, we could feed thousands and thousands of pregnant
I like
women
that.
and children,
That makes sense.
Yeah, and
So
that's how I
it's
think
like
we need to
preventive
present
medicine, right?
organic.
It's preventive medicine is what it is.
Yeah.
It's preventing disease. And so, people always ask, well, what can I do? Where can I have an effect? Where can I make a difference? We've been talking a lot about how your dollars really speak to environmental and public health protection in the marketplace. How you spend your food dollars is really a political act in many ways. Especially if you're stretching your budget to make these decisions, which I did as a young parent. I mean, when we walked through the grocery store, it was painful at times, and this was years ago,
Hmm.
say 20 years ago, so things were even harder then and more expensive, relatively speaking.
Yeah,
So
they
I
were.
understand that, but that is a political act in that sense. You're making that choice. Now, there also you're living in a community. We all live in communities where decisions are being made every day on the use of pesticides in our community, and we have to get involved in the local political process around those decisions. I mean, we live and use parks. Our kids play on playing fields.
And they
You
could
know,
have sprayed Roundup, that one
exactly.
the day
So
before, and we don't even know it that even happened. Then our kids like fall down on it, and it goes through their skin into their
right.
body.
And it's not just the turf systems, it's a synthetic turf as well. They're using antimicrobial pesticides on those systems because they have to be cleaned out of blood and all kinds of body fluids that end up on that field. So your kids are actually being exposed to antibiotic materials or antibacterial materials that are highly toxic materials. In addition, of course, there are the trees and the median strips and the roadways. I'm sure many people listening have sat behind a truck going down and spraying the median strips in their town, and the chemicals is just moving out all around, drifting
The West
off.
Nile virus spraying is something I really want to do a lot about. And actually, we had the LA News at 3 o'clock in the morning down because we prevented them spraying this one part of the street
Yeah,
where a friend of ours had her organic garden, her chickens, her beehives, her tilapia fish, and they're all getting exposed to this pesticide in the name of West Nile virus, when we could do a much better job at prevention, community education, getting everyone involved, and realizing this is worth all of us to pitch in a little bit. It doesn't take that much to get rid of your standing water and stop these
right.
mosquitoes from
So
even
it's source, like you're saying, it's source
spreading.
reduction and educating people of where those sources of breeding sites are around your home and in the community. And doing that is the way to
And
manage.
feeling good about it and
Trying
feeling
to hit
good.
an adult mosquito in flight is virtually impossible. So most of the
I know.
chemical that's coming out of that truck is not having any impact on your target insect. So
No, it's
insect-borne
like, it's so
diseases are
crazy.
another area of decision making that is done at the local level by the public health department. All of these decisions require public input. It really is essential that we get involved in our local communities. Now, when we work with Montgomery County or counties and townships in Maine, we are really hampered by state law in many cases. In the case of Maryland and Maine and 5 other states, local governments have the authority to adopt standards that are more stringent than the state law. However, in the rest of the country, state law prohibits the local jurisdictions, political subdivisions from adopting ordinances that affect private property.
Okay, this is crazy, Jay. And
Yeah,
like, and they're trying to pass more of those laws too, where state
right.
law supersedes
It
the
preempts
local law.
local authority.
Yeah, how do you say that?
Right. So, well, supersede is right. They preempt, supersede the local authority to carry out its local authority over managing its jurisdiction. And we do this with zoning, certainly. We do this with all kinds of other areas of public health protection. We manage that at the local level. We're not saying there shouldn't be a minimum level of protection by federal and state law. That's not what we're saying. But when a
Yeah.
town wants to exceed that standard and offer more protection, if we feel the 2,4-D that EPA has registered, or the glyphosate, that they're not responding to the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which you mentioned earlier, I'd like to talk about that for a moment. The local jurisdiction can step in and say, we don't want to allow the use of this material in town. Not just on the public lands, not just on our parks and playing fields, but also on any land in town where their use or its use can have non-target impacts, meaning drift off the target site, like secondhand smoke, and run off into waterways and hurt our local ecosystems. So that's an opportunity that people really, I know people are busy, but
I'm going to do something about it, Jay. I already called. I live right in the middle of Loma Linda, and I have Loma Linda Medical Center / university properties surrounding my house. They just built a brand new VA hospital right down the street from me, and they are spraying Roundup. I met with the person in charge of their landscaping for 38 years, and he uses Roundup. He's okay with it, and I'm like, well, what about the patients that come out? And I worked in the hospital. I saw the children in the oncology unit. They're fighting for their life with cancer. And I said, you're spraying Roundup right outside the hospital. So when they come out for fresh air, they're being exposed to Roundup and they're trying to fight for their life with cancer. This doesn't make sense to me that you are doing that. And you're spraying it all around my house. And I'm a local resident here, and that stuff is drifting into my space where I live.
So that's involuntary exposure. We actually have a project with hospitals because, as you just mentioned, hospitals treat people that are exceptionally vulnerable to chemical exposure.
Yes.
Yeah, whether you're in the asthma
As a
unit.
dietitian, I know that all too well.
Right. So, I think our experiences at most hospitals are very receptive to this question. They just aren't aware. They never thought that in hiring the low bid pest control company to come in and spray every week in the hospital might be a bad thing. They assume these are chemicals registered by the government. They must be.
They're safe. Yeah, that they're safe.
Yeah.
The government said they're safe.
So really, I think, again, on our website, our hospitals project, just go to the Beyond Pesticides website. People can see the project, and we'd be more than happy to work with local hospitals in transitioning to organic management. We call it integrated pest management in the hospital in terms of structural management, and organic land management on the campuses that surround many hospitals. So that's an incredible opportunity. Schools, another opportunity. There is no reason to use pesticides in schools, in the indoor environment, and certainly in terms of the
Well,
playing
there's
field.
fields. We had the vice president of the Teachers Association on our show because there are schools here in California, especially in the Fresno area, where they're spraying pesticides on strawberry fields, which we know are cancer causing, and we determined that like 12 years ago, and we've allowed the continued use because there's nothing else to replace it with. They're in hazmat suits, and they're spraying directly across the street from schools. And what their concern was not only the students, but the staff, because the staff actually lives there and works there for years and years. And so they're constantly getting sprayed. And they said they used to warn them, and now they don't even warn them anymore.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I'd take exception to in what you just said is that there aren't alternatives because, again, we're growing a lot of organic strawberries and we don't need to use methyl bromide. So, again, it's another example of how we shouldn't be tolerating these use patterns. Even buffer zones, as you mentioned earlier, the transport of drift can go thousands of miles. I mean, there are studies showing chemical use in the Imperial Valley ending up in rain and fog on the East Coast.
That's 3,000 miles.
That's 3,000 miles. So we're talking about being picked up by wind currents.
And then the ocean, and then we're polluting the ocean as well.
Right. So we shouldn't. This is no longer a discussion about reduction of hazardous chemical use. We have to be talking about elimination of these uses and the adoption of organic systems management approaches. We have replaced in hospitals, in schools, on playing fields, on people's lawns, in parks and playgrounds. We've changed the system by which we manage those land and building areas.
How do you get past the fear of all that, Jay? Because even when I look at Loma Linda, the amount of square acreage that they have is massive. Really, they're a huge facility. And when you look at transitioning to this whole new system, it probably just seems so big to them. And how do you get past that fear of the change?
At Beyond Pesticides, we have a program where we'll actually come into the community, we'll do the soil testing, we'll evaluate their management practices, we'll give them a plan for transitioning, which typically means that they're putting much more focus on soil management. They're evaluating what's in the soil. We do in addition to a nutrient and chemistry analysis of the soil, we also do a food web analysis so we can actually see what is going on in the soil, in the organic matter, the percentage of organic matter, the biomass, the level of beneficial fungi and beneficial bacteria, and we then set up a program to improve the soil so that it's creating nitrogen on its own, it's creating the nutrients that are needed for a more resilient grass, and so that transition plan is then available to the managers, and then we'll actually come in and do training. If the locality will commit to at least some pilot sites, right? So that they say to us, yes, we're really interested in this. We'll give you the local park downtown and the playing field at our sports facility, and we will commit to transitioning this area to organic practices. Once they see that this is a viable system, that it works, it's cost competitive, that they're going to save money over time because they're not buying expensive chemical inputs, they will be excited. We see this in a lot of communities. We've been in Reno and Nevada. We're working on the state grounds in Carson City, the state capitol grounds, Annapolis, Maryland. So there are high-profile areas where this transition is happening, and I'll tell you, some of these land managers who are committed to their chemicals, when they see that this works, they say, well, I thought I needed to use these chemicals. Now that I see I don't need them, I'm not committed to them.
Well, tell me what to do, because I called and talked to the head of the whole system,
right.
And I talked to his secretary, and I said, okay, I'm hoping that you guys are going to be receptive to this, because if not, then I'm going to have to take other steps to bring attention to this, and I don't want you guys to look bad. I want you to look good, because I see that taking steps towards this is actually going to be a selling point. I mean, on why Loma Linda is so much better. And so, but I was kind of like at a standstill right there, because I wasn't sure they said, okay, email me and say, this is what we want you to do. And I kind of felt like, okay, well, what should I do here? I wasn't really sure as a citizen what I should do. And then also I was thinking, because we have parks around here too, I should go to a city council meeting. And plus the fact that Loma Linda is such a big part of the city, should I be saying something at the city council meeting? So all these things have been going
Yeah.
through my head. But is all of this on your website?
Yes, how to begin a campaign to transition the community to alternative
And I
management.
thought, how could I be a leader for this whole friggin' city?
You
How could
know,
I
part
do that
part of it is obviously it's best if you can form a group and
and get a
or
committee together?
yeah, a core group of people who are concerned and feel that they can
Because
devote
we
some
live here, it
time.
affects us.
Yeah. So this group then can go to an elected official and say, whether it's a school board member or a city council person, and say, look, we want you to sponsor legislation that will move the community away from these toxic chemicals. And, depending on how receptive this individual is and how receptive others on the council are, you can go from starting a pilot program to going like Montgomery County has full bore to make this change. And so you really have to scope out the politics. Sometimes parks department directors are receptive and they just don't have the resources to do this. And when you offer them the resources and say, well, I'll link you up with Beyond Pesticides, they'll do X, Y, and Z. They just need a commitment that you'll designate X number of pilot sites. They become more receptive and say, sure, I just don't have the resources to do this at this time. And then we can, meet that need. We can cover some of these costs to affect this transition in the community.
And
So,
then that becomes a model program, really, for
it
others.
becomes a model. It becomes a model exactly for other. So sometimes you bring it to a political level. Sometimes it can be at the administrative level. But I find, over time, our goal is institutionalize these programs. We want them to be part of the local community law. Part of the ordinances that govern how the quality of life in the community and the practices that are utilized to protect public health in the community.
Well, I feel much more empowered now, and I'm so glad to know that you guys. And that's what I mean when I say Beyond Pesticides is one of our truly valuable resources that we have for this country, because you guys do incredible work, and I know that you guys are a nonprofit and you depend on donations as well. And so that you have something on your website where people can donate to help support your efforts
Of
in
course.
like what we were just talking about
None of
here.
this happens without the generous support of our donors. And, obviously we're here. The reason people invest in this organization is because they want to see change. They don't want to see tinkering around the edges. They want to see this transformation to organic systems, organic land management, whether we're talking about agriculture or residential, parks, playgrounds, playing fields. We need this transformation to protect health and sustainability into the future.
Well, I know it's really easy if people go to their website and they want to
Yeah.
donate. And to me, what a great use of your dollars, because so many people, they want to donate to a nonprofit and they really want to feel like their dollars are doing something important. And when I look at the kind of how you guys spend your the dollars that are donated to your organization, I mean, this is something that is, you spend a dollar over here and it's impacting a community.
Yeah.
It's impacting the future. It's impacting a change that's going to keep going into the future, and it stops a system that is a system that is a system that is, causing sickness, disease, environmental contamination, a system that is not sustainable.
Right.
As we go forward. And I just really want to thank you, Jay, and your entire staff there at Beyond Pesticides. You guys are awesome. You're my heroes. And I really want to thank you for all your time today. people are going to be able to listen to this on YouTube as well, and we're going to definitely be promoting them to come and listen to our talk that we had today, because I learned a lot myself. And that's what I get excited about talking to you, is I get to learn some new things myself that I get to go share, and that's what we want people to do. We want them to listen to this. We want them to learn, and then go teach somebody.
Yeah.
Don't just keep it to yourself.
You want action.
That's
and
right.
Action happens at every level, Action happens within the home, and it happens within the community.
Well, I kind of say it stops here, this body right here. I don't want Monsanto in my body. I don't want these chemicals in my body. And I decide that. I decide what goes in my mouth here, and what I'm breathing around inside my home here, when I'm spraying and using here. So, we can. That's something we are in control of. Yeah. Is our own bodies. So we can always start there. Even if you just start on what's going on in your own home and the food that you're eating. And I love what you said about, buying the foods that you eat the most of organic, at least if you can start there. So thank you so much for everything, Jay. And
thank you, Elaine. Appreciate it.
Okay, and keep up the good work, and I'll be sending you a progress report. So
okay, you too.
I'm going to start implementing.
Let us know how we can help. Okay.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Jay.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay. Well.